Hey everyone, welcome back to the AI Pulse podcast. We've officially entered the Star Trek future. Basically, we're now talking to computers and having them take action isn't just sci-fi anymore. AI agents, our wonderful topic of today, can now understand natural language and fulfill tasks. But here's the real challenge. It's not just about being able to handle a conversation and accessing data. It's about having the right data in the first place. And that's something that a lot of enterprises and organizations in general are kind of looking over. So, for AI agents to really work in real world business scenarios, they need to be reliable. Structured data has to ground their responses, and that's not always present in enterprises. Whether it's pulling data from databases, processing documents in real time, or actually having insights into the process to begin with, and then, of course, down the line, preparing data for retrieval augmented generation, for example, without that high quality data, even the smartest of AIs will struggle. And we've seen this over the last couple of months. Now, today we're cutting through some of the hype to discuss what it really takes to make AI agents work at scale. We're joined by Lauren Goerz from Rasa, a company that's been shaping conversational AI with a more structured and practical approach. We'll talk about why AI agents need more than just AI, the critical role of data preparation, process AI, and what businesses should focus on to build that AI that actually delivers results. Lauren, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. Welcome. It's great to have you. So, do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself before we dive into the questions that we've all got lined up for you today?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on. So, I am working at Rasa as what's called a technical marketing engineer. And I like to kind of think of it a little bit like maybe kind of like a hype person for conversational AI. So, I really am focused on the topic of conversational AI, which in the past, I would say, 8 years or so has mostly been called conversational AI, but in the last maybe 3 years has a new name, which is Agentic AI. And so, I think that's a really interesting kind of space that I've been working in. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what we do at Rasa is we provide the software that allows our customers to build conversational interfaces. So things that are talking. Think of it like the chat widget at the bottom of your screen, or if you're talking to your brand via an app or on the phone, anything that kind of automates the conversation between brands and their customers. And that's really what we do at Rasa.
Super happy to have you on the podcast. And you mentioned that there was this shift from conversational AI and now it's called differently. And that actually brings me to the first question, which is AI agents mean so many different things to different people. So we are actually super interested how Rasa does define AI agents and how does it differ maybe from the broader industry hype?
Yep. Really good question. I think anytime I talk about agentic AI, it's always good, important to start with the definition. And maybe for me, maybe a bit of a hot take. I would say I don't think the word AI agent is super, super helpful these days because over the last maybe, I don't know, year or so, I'd say that anything is called an AI agent if it even whispers to a large language model. And so I think that's challenging sometimes for companies to have a good understanding of this because this is a term that really belongs in the hands of marketers today. And I'm also a marketer, so I'm guilty as charged in some senses. But I think that the word agentic AI could, doesn't necessarily mean something stable to every group of people that come to the table. So I don't find it the most helpful word to talk about. However, I do think that people tend to use it broadly as a category for describing things that are talking as we used to describe conversational AI. And I think agent is kind of the new virtual digital chatbot assistant agent today. People would just call it an agent. And so that being said, I think at Rasa, we try to focus a little bit less on the buzzword specifically and a little bit more on, how do we build purpose-built conversational interfaces that actually understand well, reason consistently, and take meaningful action. And they can use any number of different technologies under the hood to accomplish this goal.
Well, I was actually curious to pick a little bit into every single time that we start a conversation about AI agents. It's good to kind of outline how you see it because, as you said, that there are these many different variations of it. Do you have an idea why that is? I think if I kind of look back through history, we went through the hype cycle of Gen AI, and then shortly after, even though typically those types of things take about 5 to 10 years, if you look at the typical kind of wave for technology, right now it was quickly followed on by AI agents or agentic AI, whoever you want to call it. And we saw so many switches into that kind of paradigm so quickly from companies that in some cases have nothing to do with it. Do you feel like it diminishes the opportunity that is out there for the technology because it is being hyped up, or do you feel like it's not getting enough hype at the moment?
Good question. I would say in our shoes here at Rasa, we definitely benefit from the hype in a good way, right? So for me, when I kind of think about it, I'm like, great. If people are pumped about AI agents, that means they're also ultimately pumped about conversational AI. They're excited about the opportunity to automate conversations between brands and customers. And so in general, it is kind of a good thing, right? Because it shines a spotlight on the space. However, I think it also leads to maybe unrealized expectations that people might have working with this type of technology. So I think if you think of your experience talking with ChatGPT, right, it's almost always understanding you, giving you a really nice fluent experience, but you can't necessarily apply that super easily to every single specific use case. Of course, there's, we all know this, folks that have been in this kind of general broader technological space over the last year, there are also inherent problems with just connecting your brand to ChatGPT. And there's a number of good reasons why most brands don't do that today. So I guess to sum it up in a nutshell, I would say super helpful because it's gotten people really excited about what this type of technology can do. Language models have been a massive accelerator for our technology, at least. But I would say overall, I think there's also some groundwork we need to do collectively as software providers to help people understand it better.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that because it is, so many different variations, and there is a lot of agent washing, if you ask me, at the moment. So, always happy to hear people actually talking about the reality of it together with us on the podcast. So, you already mentioned it. I think, and also when I started playing around with agents, and this was mostly when I started playing around with tools like Cursor, Lovable, Replit, and others around coding agents, which have kind of accelerated very quickly. And it's really cool what you can do with it. But especially in the current versions, it's gotten a little bit better with Claude Sonnet. Actually, 3.7's got given them an upgrade, but nonetheless, you can still see that there is so much trial and error within that process, which is in some cases, depending on the process, that's good because that's basically the process that a developer does too, tries, builds, then sees that it fails and tries again until he fixes the problem. But in a lot of times in organizations, that's not exactly the way that you want your processes run. Why do you think that? Well, I'll ask the specific question. Why does Rasa believe in a much more structured approach to these types of technologies?
Yep. Really great question. I think we also have internally kind of let's say a catchphrase we've used to describe this kind of trial and error experience, and we've called it prompt and pray. Effectively, you're prompting an LLM and you're praying that at the end of it, it's going to come back with the information and the right process that you're hoping for it to do. And so I think that's something that for us is challenging given the fact that we work with, broadly our customer base tends to be, let's say, big customers with big bots working in regulated or, let's say at least high security environments. And so for them, it's really important that trial and error can't be a reality. You've probably I've seen this on LinkedIn, other places, 90% accuracy isn't good enough for most of these folks in enterprise. And so for us, we really tried to ask questions. Okay, great. Of course, we love the fluency and the kind of natural sounding experience that language models can give that massively improves the customer experience. But we don't love necessarily the, let's say, unknown waters that you enter when you start asking your LLM to engage directly one-to-one with your customers. And so we thought, okay, what can we do from a software perspective to actually kind of build a separation of concerns where you have an LLM that allows you to get that really nice contextual understanding, fluency into your conversational experience, but nonetheless prevent it from actually being the system that makes the decision about how you serve your customers. And so I think that's where we kind of introduced what I would describe as a bit of a hybrid dialogue system. That's kind of what we would call it in the conversational AI space, the thing that decides what the conversational AI assistant or agent should do next. And that kind of allowed us to separate these two concerns. So using the LLM where we think it's doing positive things for end users, and then separating it away from the spaces where it's actually not helping end users by providing them either inaccurate information, or it could also be, leaving it exposed to being prompt injected, lots of different things that could be dangerous for a highly regulated customer.
One of the big advantages of LLMs is definitely, increasing the fluency of those conversations. That's really a big plus because there's nothing more annoying, than talking to a chatbot and it just hit a wall basically at points because it's not capable of understanding what you want because it's not phrasing it in the right way. So that's one big plus from LLMs. But there's also, the thing of connecting it to backend data, right? And this is often overlooked. And I mean, if it's beyond FAQ scenarios, for example, you need this backend integration. Why do you think this is often, overlooked, let's say?
Spot on. I think for us, we describe these use cases as kind of there's kind of informational use cases in conversation, right? So your Q&As, how do I do this? How do I do that? Things that replace kind of the FAQ section of your website, right? And typically a lot of customers that we have handled this with a piece of technology that's called RAG, so retrieval augmented generation, allowing you to use an LLM to query a database of documents and provide question and answer. And RAG's actually really great for this, I would say, as a software. It's really expedited the build process for a lot of our customers because they don't have to, manually code all of this. However, we call this often, if you're using just RAG alone, it tends to result in what I would describe as chatty deflection if you're trying to use RAG for both Q&A and also a transactional use case. A transactional use case for us is something that actually walks a user through a process or solves a problem for them in the chat itself. And if you're only using kind of this Q&A with no backend connection, then you end up with an AI assistant that gives you a long paragraph of how you might go about doing something and sending you to another channel entirely to actually complete it. Whereas for us, 100% more valuable is actually solving the problem in the chat itself. And I think this is, ultimately, Abby, you also, I would say, would be a type of software that would be useful for someone doing conversational AI that maybe wants to have a look and analyze their documents in the context of conversation. Other backend connections for us look like, for example, in the case of a telecom conversation, you might have an internet problem. You can go through the process of kind of trying to diagnose what the problem is and ultimately ending with maybe an internet line reset. Something like that is super valuable and so much more useful than telling the user, okay, now call this number and go somewhere else.
So I should stop typing an agent in every single chat box that I see just because I want to talk to a real person, because they've actually become useful. But it's interesting because that's just something that I think if you look at it, and please, Lauren, tell me if I'm entirely wrong, which is entirely possible. But if I look back at kind of like history, chatbots popped up and they were there, but they didn't really help anybody. And I think definitely with I think just the exposure of a larger group of people, basically like, the general population, to technologies such as ChatGPT and others, has kind of reinvigorated like, oh, this could actually work. So maybe now I should go and try this. Do you see it the same way that it came, nobody really liked it, it went away again because I saw them disappear, literally, and then now they're back, but now they're actually useful? Is that kind of a fair assessment of how things have gone? And do you see that evolving even further? Where do you think it's heading?
Yep. First of all, absolutely spot on again. I would say all of us as consumers have experienced this pain conversing with a chatbot. And I'm one of the first ones, sometimes as someone who's often built conversational AI agents, I know exactly the buzzwords I would need to say from, agent to even profanity to trying to get the assistant to actually respond to you and send you to a human, right? I think these days are definitely gone by. It's no longer the case that the most frequent question in your, that I see when I'm looking through a log is, talk to a human, which is great. That's already a huge step forward. I think moving forward, it's definitely only going to get better. I think we're seeing this. We saw this early on with language models in general, that there really isn't a moat to this game anymore. We're seeing more efficient models. We're seeing smaller language models. We're seeing fine-tuned language models. All of these things contribute to systems that are not only, more fluent and more, with larger context windows, better able to solve problems, but they're also becoming cheaper and more efficient and more accessible, which is great. In general, it's a wonderful time to be building applications today. Seen this also from others saying the same thing. I think it's a great time to build something new.
It really is. And that's really the exciting part about it, that the speed at which you can build things today is just staggering in my mind. Now, we did touch on that it does sometimes go wrong. And most of it, when you said, if you just try to use RAG for actual transactional process, when it's not plugged into these actual components, other pieces of technology or reliable backend data, that it doesn't really deliver the kind of results that the consumer, the end user, is trying to look for. So everybody always loved hearing things that go wrong. Can you share a couple of real world examples where it didn't really go well and might actually have caused an issue? Because I know of one that was a really funny one, actually, but I'll let you go first.
I wish I had a really good funny one. I have more of a serious one, I would say, but I'm excited to hear about the funny one. When I was back back in my implementation days before I worked at Rasa Product, I was what I would describe as a conversational AI implementation consultant. So I'd go in and help teams actually implement AI assistants. And one of the things that I noticed was a common problem, especially in international projects, is the data formatting of your backend system versus the format of the data that you actually had to give back to the user. A good example I can think of is kind of when you look at the kind of the decimal system that you use in Germany versus America, for example, to separate between thousands markers, within monetary values. That was something that was actually really challenging, because if you have a finance assistant that has a whole bunch of data that is set up for the American audience, and you have a German consumer coming in and requesting to transfer a certain amount of money with commas, things can go wrong. So I think that was something that was maybe more on the serious side. It was really important that we got it right, that we were able to kind of translate the different formats of different pieces of data to make sure that from the consumer side, they could put in what was natural to them. And from our side, we could understand what they were saying and put in the right amounts with the backend system.
Yeah, that's a great example. The funny story I think it was actually in the news at some point, was that it was a logistical provider that actually just put a chatbot onto their website. They tried to build a rack system. It was really straightforward, and it was meant to do simple Q&A, but what they didn't do is have, like you mentioned earlier, that layer in between, so that nobody could actually go and talk to the LLM directly. So what happened is people very quickly find out that it was just a straight line connection into GPT, and they could ask it anything without actually having to pay a dime. So what happened is that the cost for those companies exploded exponentially because people were just using it as a free version of ChatGPT 4, which was interesting to see. So luckily they found out pretty quickly, so they shut it down. But the funny part is that they reverted back to their previous conversational AI, which was all built on top of, like it used to be, a lot of rules, a lot of actual conversations being constructed and having a very narrow path. So that I actually found quite funny, that yes, it offers great benefits, but like you already pointed out, it has to be in that right kind of control plane as well, so you don't bump into those kind of mishaps and you end up in the news for the wrong reasons.
That's true. I think it won't be the last time. I think we'll see more interesting things, and it's kind of that goes back to this kind of like trial and error thing that you're always face when you're working with language models, and we face the same as well. Parts of our system do use prompts, right? So it's something that we have to constantly think about clever ways to make sure you're, like you said, you're not talking always directly to an LLM.
Yeah, to give our audience, some, let's say, practical tips, because, you have made some experiences at Rasa, and we, made experiences with customers. Maybe we can give them some hints on where to focus on, because, industries like finance, healthcare, telco, you name them, all of them that are mostly highly regulated, where getting data right is really critical, because already those really small errors can, do big harm. For example, integrating our document AI API, could really be a seamless integration for document extraction into a customer chatbot. So where do you think customers should put their focus on to truly deliver value to their customers? Like, what use cases, where should they invest, what should they do, in order to deliver this value to their customers?
Yeah, maybe to connect to what you're just talking about, kind of this like clever backend integrations. We talked about this earlier as well, but I think really like go beyond Q&A and actually solve problems. That would be my first point, because definitely start with Q&A. It's a great place to start. You can get started really quickly, but think about already from day one how you can help customers more than just being the FAQ section of a website replaced. I think that's absolutely something that they should consider, and that's really valuable. I think we're going to start to see, especially with large language models and the fact that teams can build these applications a lot quicker, they're going to have the freedom and the time to actually go deeper and start thinking about, okay, hey, I have a bunch of telecom bills. I have loads of folks coming in and asking me, hey, what's up with my bill? What's wrong here? How can I use document processing to and analyze that and send the answer response back to the user without actually having to talk to a human? And so I think, and that's maybe leads me into another point. I wouldn't say necessarily that we're at the point where I would fully recommend remove all the humans from the loop. I think in general, that's kind of always been the mantra of most folks working in my industry, is that, we want these systems to augment human folks that are currently working on this problem today. And we also want to bring them into our projects. I think that's also another thing that would be my point too, is don't forget to, like, on an operational perspective, to actually bring in your subject matter experts into your team when you start building these applications. Because that's something that I've seen. You have some really clever developers go away to kind of an innovation pod and come back with something, and they haven't necessarily worked hand in hand with the team that's currently automating the process today. I think that's super important, and maybe obvious, but I still see it happening today. Bring these people along with you on your AI journey so that they can actually help you be more successful, and they're going to be willing to actually accept it into their workflows. So that's 2 points, I would say.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, definitely.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the innovation pod, and that people don't really talk to the people that are actually operating, executing on the process itself. So we see that too, right? So it's not uncommon. It's a mistake that has been made over and over again. I think it was also contributing to some of the failure rates that were attributed to AI projects, or even still to this day, IT projects. If you look at those numbers, just a simple IT project, typically 1 out of every 2 fails for some reason. And a lot of times it is just about that change management, actually involving the people that are executing the process, that have to be involved in the process, and bringing them along for the ride, so they can see that the value of the technology is going to make it easier for them to do their jobs. So if we compare that, if we kind of maybe draw that parallel to AI agents, giving people tools. One of the things that I'm currently seeing is that there's a lot of emphasis on connecting AI agents to tools that are available to them. So Marlene already mentioned one, which is Document AI API, so that they can read documents. I think another one is definitely Process AI, so they are able to understand the process before they go and look at, okay, how do I traverse that process myself? And another great component, actually, I think it's something that doesn't usually happen as fast again, is standardization. So Anthropic came out with MCP. I don't know if you've heard about it, the Model Context Protocol. Do you see that being as a driving factor so that tools are available to any type of agent? Do you guys have a type of framework that you use to be able to plug in tools into Rasa for your conversational chatbots?
Yeah, so we at Rasa have something embedded in the framework, which is called custom actions, which ultimately is kind of a template allowing for developers to come in and build out custom integrations to their system. Of course, we have some existing connectors that you can connect with that makes it a little bit faster. But what I've personally observed from, I would say, real projects, right? For POCs, connectors are great, like pre-templated connectors. But when you actually go into the organization and you're connecting with 20-year-old backend systems, or other dispersed groups within the organization, you sometimes have to connect it yourself. And so I think that's something at Rasa that we really tried to do with the framework itself, is kind of open it up, peel away the black box, so that you can go in and actually make the connection yourself if we don't already have the connector for it. So I think that's something that we've tried to offer, knowing that, backend connections are diverse and no one platform can ever provide a connector for every single vendor out there. Ultimately, we're not Zapier for connectors, but nonetheless, I think giving the freedom to build them in is an important first step.
Yeah, I always admire whenever a developer says it's just an API. Well, they should try to connect to SAP or Salesforce, or God forbid, an AS400 system that's still lying around in the enterprise, and actually you have to go talk to, because that's where the data is. So that's always an interesting first-time experience for anybody.
I mean, we can actually jump again into the where is AI agents heading. I think it's just great to have also some more, practical tips, insights. I think we covered a lot, Max.
Yeah, and the only thing, maybe as a very last question, or maybe it's a question before, because we were just talking about connectors. Do you see that kind of traction happening within the use cases that your customers are trying to do as well? Is it more and more interacting with real world documents, trying to extract data from those and then processing that? You already mentioned a couple of examples, but I do think that it is a reality that we live in a document world where whenever you want to try and get onboarded, you want to get a service, you submit a claim, it all comes with a document attached to it. Is that something that you guys see as a rising kind of motion that is trying to be solved for, also through conversational AI, or is that still not the direction that it's heading?
I think the connector landscape isn't quite there yet. I would say I think us as vendors, we haven't built out the partnerships and the connectors to actually get to that point. So I definitely see it in the future. So you folks here know a lot more than I do. I think that's been is like making sure we get the data in, we have a connector, and then we can actually process it. But this like bill, why is my bill wrong query is something that's super hot right now, I would say.
Mm.
I remember you mentioning that, you could say, yeah, well, all the billing data is somewhere in a backend system. But the problem is, I think this is what you suggested, right? It would make more sense if the customer really like in real time provides their bill and points out which section, right? And it's not like kind of search for in a backend or in a database, but let the customer provide the document in real time, so the bot or the AI assistant can, kind of parse through the document and see what issues might be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting bit right now, and I think that's why the fact that you said I'm not really well versed in the document processing side is exactly why I think there's so many applications of the technology right now on documents, because the technology already exists for so long. The problem that you just mentioned, is this the actual document we need? Is this a picture of something else? That can be solved with classification in a heartbeat. Is this the actual data that I want to have from the document? Does this correspond to the data that we have on file? That's something you can do with document extraction. So I think that's why I also asked about, what is the rising trend right now? Because I do see it definitely going in that direction. And I think for vendors of conversational AI agents to actually be successful in solving those real world use cases as they get closer and closer to the operational stuff, they will have to integrate with systems like ours simply to have that level of accuracy and consistency when it comes to extracting data from documents. Because that's, as you mentioned actually early on, 90% is not good enough. It has to be the 100%, especially in a conversation that you're going in a two-way street. They get a little bit grumpy and usually they walk away.
I think we just haven't right now we're really on basic integrations, if that makes sense. And not just us, like all vendors everywhere. I think we're just picking up speed on and we almost took a step back, right? Because all of these folks are like, RAG everything, let's just do RAG. And then they forget to connect it to something that's actually useful for the customer. I mean, I couldn't imagine if I could just take a picture and it would scan my document and tell me what telecom in German was actually trying to say to me. That would be fantastic. But something I think we haven't delivered it yet, but I know one of our customers, Swisscom, wants to try and figure out how to do it for their bills.
Yeah. Maybe we can also say in this case, it would just augment their capabilities into this. They are able to read. And if this would be also more fluent and not just only their, conversational abilities, but they can, seamlessly read any type of document. I mean, that would be super powerful, right? Because then they would, could really solve your problems. You can in real time provide whatever document and they can immediately give you response. Since we all agree that, documents will be definitely one part, or document processing will be definitely one part that's getting bigger in the future with AI agents. Is there anything else you see, coming up in the next couple of years that is trending, or stuff you think will come up, as a focus topic?
So where do we see agents kind of evolving in the next few years? I would say, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, ultimately AI is getting cheaper, faster, and more accessible, which is great for building real world applications. I think we talked about that a little bit earlier. I think it's just great because so many more people can get into the AI game at a price point that meets their needs. So that's exciting. I think for conversational AI, that opens up a lot of opportunities. Ultimately, I think brands, and we talked a little bit about this earlier too, in our approach to kind of dialogue systems and how we manage dialogue in a conversational experience. I think for us, as we look towards the future, we really want to expand beyond just kind of one or two approaches. I think in general, there's lots of different ways under this big conversational AI umbrella, from, very, very agentic, systems with a lot of agency to systems that are very deterministic. And I think depending on the type of use case that you have, it's going to be really important in the future to be able to orchestrate between, let's say, different types of conversational experiences based on the amount of risk that you want to take on in that moment for that specific use case. So I think that's something at Rasa that we really try and provide for our customers, is kind of the ability to orchestrate between, different ways of managing and running conversation with customers so that you can decide the way that you want to talk to them, how much agency you want to give the language model in that specific moment. And I think that's something that looking forward is exciting. And ultimately, I think this, we were talking a little bit earlier about backend connections. And I think as we move forward, we're going to see a lot more advanced types of backend connections. Document processing, we spoke about earlier, of course, a hot topic for Abby here. I think that's something that in the conversational AI, I would love to see more of that. I think right now there's not a ton of it, but if you can imagine, you've got, I get a cryptic bill from my telecom provider. I could send it into my AI assistant and actually get some information about that specific document that I received. Fantastic. And I think this is, I'm currently living in Germany. It's a very document heavy society. I think in general, it would be great to be able to get a little bit more insight about the type of mail that I'm receiving, especially as it pertains to bills. But there's tons of other things. I'd actually be curious on your side. One of the things that is also important, we talked about RAG, there's the Agentic RAG, there's lots of different types of retrieval augmented generation. One of the things is, let's say, the type of, cleaning the data or preparing the data for good RAG experiences. Is this something on your side that's also, kind of something that you provide? Because I think that would also be interesting. We've said it before to our customers, if you have data that's not ready for Excel, it's probably not ready for a RAG system, right? You need to prepare it a little bit more.
That's actually a great comparison, because yes, it's both a really exciting use case, and it's also a use case that I would say that we've seen before. Back in the day when search was a heavy thing and people were uploading all of their documents, they had it to have all the text layers of those images, those scans that they had available for the actual indexation engine to be able to access it. The story with RAG is somewhat similar, although it is a little bit more advanced. And our technology can definitely prepare the document in such a state that it contains and maintains the structure. So if you have tables, if you have images, if you have headers, if you have segments, if you have anything and everything, we can actually transpose that into actual structured data, so that when you have a document that is just flat text with zero structure to it, you can imagine that we can port that into, as you mentioned, a kind of an Excel type format. If it's ready enough for that, it is ready enough for RAG. That is a very popular use case right now. And that comes with using our deterministic technology that looks at the detail of the document and maintains all of that as much as possible. And if it doesn't, then it will actually also tell you, instead of just trying to fake the answer, which is an important step.
Absolutely. Yeah, we should kind of connect with our customers and understand. I think on our side, we do a lot of helping our customers connect their RAG systems, vector databases to Rasa. But I'd love to know, I think that'll be my homework from this podcast here, go back and understand, okay, what are the different techniques that they're using today to actually prepare these documents? Because I would imagine that, automating that mundane process would be very efficient.
Exactly, because that's the thing that people are often jumping to. They're simply dumping all of their PDFs, all of their knowledge bases into this vector database, and then they're getting bad results from RAG, but they didn't think about the step before, was this actually preparing the data of the documents that has to go into the embedding process and into the vector database. There's always one more step that has to be done. It's a simple one, because it is just standard conversion. It's nothing complicated, but it's usually the most important one that gets omitted.
Final remark, because I think it's connecting those two things, like conversational AI and document processing, we all just agreed on is something that will, just getting more important in the future, because it's just important to have this solid foundation, this accurate data to really deliver value to customers in either conversations or other processes. So where can we actually learn more about Rasa, Lauren? Is there any space where listeners could, check out more about Rasa?
If you want to get in touch, feel free to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. There's only one Lauren Goerz at Rasa, so I'm pretty easy to find there. But in general, I think also if you want to give Rasa a go, get some hands-on experience, if you go to our Rasa doc, you will find that we have a free developer edition. So if you want to get hands-on and actually try to build an AI assistant with Rasa, you can do that. We've even got a developer competition going on where you can win up to 10K. So lots of great opportunities to give Rasa a try, especially right now.
Awesome.
Cool. Thanks, Lauren.
Look forward to that. So thank you so much, Lauren, for coming onto the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks so
much. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.